There's no better feeling than a personal win, and the State Farm Personal Price Plan can help you do just that. Talk to a State Farm agent today to learn how you can bundle and save with the Personal Price Plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
This is the FPL Draft Zone, your fantasy team's best signing of the season.
We're 2 weeks into the new season. There's been ups, there's been downs, and there's been an Erling Haaland hat-trick. The transfer deadline is a matter of days away, but who are the names you're hoping join the top flight? And it's a big week of waivers. We share our top picks. Hello and welcome to the FPL Draft Zone, a podcast all about Draft FPL. I'm Dom Crofts, I hope you're well, and first of all, I am sorry. I am sorry for not recording this pod sooner. I am sorry for not delivering it on time. I am actually out in Monaco right now, surrounded by very posh people I have nothing in common with. I am working on the Champions League draw, so this pod is being recorded right now in a hotel room, so I am sorry in advance if it sounds like it's being recorded in a hotel room. Now today we are going to be taking a little look back at Game Week 2 before turning our attention to Game Week 3. There will be winners, there will be losers, there will be heroes, there will be villains, and there will be waivers all over the shop. But first let's have a quick run through the results from the weekend. We said on the last pod that these fixtures, based on the past, guaranteed goals, and do you know what? We were right! In the early kickoff on Saturday, Brighton beat Manchester United 2-1. Danny Welbeck, last week's hero of the week, scoring against his old club, and João Pedro getting a late winner after Amad Diallo had equalised for the visitors. Then there were 5 games at 3 o'clock. Crystal Palace lost again 2-0 at home to West Ham. Souček and Bowen with the goals. Fulham beat Leicester 2-1. Emil Smith-Rowe on target in that one, as was Alex Iwobi, who has followed up a strong pre-season with a good start to the actual season. Manchester City overturned a 1-0 deficit to cruise past Ipswich, Erling Haaland hitting a hat-trick in that one, and Nottingham Forest won 1-0 at Southampton, Morgan Gibbs-White on the mark for the tricky trees. As for Spurs, they absolutely battered Everton 4-0, Son with a brace, Romero also returning. Everton have now conceded 7 goals in 2 games and scored a big fat 0. And then, in the late kickoff, it finished Aston Villa 0, Arsenal 2, Leo Trossard coming off the bench to break the deadlock, Thomas Partey adding a second, and David Raya with a quite ridiculous save. Then on Sunday there were 3 games. Bournemouth drew 1-1 with Newcastle, Semenyo and Anthony Gordon with the goals. Chelsea annihilated Wolves 6-2 at Molineux with Noni Madueke getting a hat-trick, having called the entire town a dump. In more extreme words than that. Cole Palmer scoring 1, getting a hat-trick of assists as well, and João Felix coming off the bench to score on his second debut for the club. And the final game of the weekend saw Liverpool take on Brentford. It finished 2-0, Mo Salah amongst the goals. So those were the results. But who were the players that shone bright like a diamond? And who were the players that ruined our goddamn weekends? It's time for a little bit of this.
The FPL Draft Zone. Winners and losers.
Yes, first up, let's talk winners, and it is Thomas Souček who gets the first plaudits of the day. He's tall, he's gangly, he's lanky, he's long. Some would say he's not very good at football, but as a draft asset in these first 2 game weeks, he has been absolute ruddy gold. An assist and 5 points in game week 1 against Aston Villa, a goal and 8 points against Crystal Palace this weekend. He's playing very far forward for the Hammers. He is reaping his rewards. Has he been drafted in your league? Maybe not. Will he be picked up this week? Maybe not. Should he be? Well, West Ham take on Manchester City next, so definitely not. But if you've owned him in these opening weeks of the season, take a bloody bow. Another winner this week is Heung-min Son, who walked away with 2 goals against Everton. He also got all 3 bonus points, taking his game week tally to 16 points. after a quiet game against Leicester, some people were writing him off, and perhaps some draft managers might even have lost faith and traded him for someone else. But if they did, they will be regretting it this week after his masterclass against Everton. So congratulations if you own him in your league. And of course, we have to give some love to Chelsea double act Cole Palmer and Noni Madueke, who combined to absolutely destroy Wolves. Palmer got a goal and 3 assists, racking up 17 points in the process, and Madueke went even better, hitting a hat-trick and earning draft owners a massive 20 points. Chelsea may be the maddest club on the planet. They may have more players in their squad than Leonardo DiCaprio has supermodel girlfriends, but based on their first couple of games, they could be a lot of fun to watch this season, and if you catch their attacking assets at the right time, then who knows? Maybe, just maybe, they could be the difference between a draft league title and mid-table mediocrity. And another group of winners for you this week is, of course, defenders, who are dominating the bonus point system in FPL right now. 7 defenders got bonus points in the 7 games played on Saturday. And for all the talk pre-season about how defenders are unlikely to benefit from the new BPS changes, they seem to be doing okay right now. As for the losers, Ollie Watkins makes it into the Hall of Shame this week after missing 2 great chances against Arsenal. The first one he put wide with the goal gaping. It was a chance that had an XG rating of 0.62, and then he managed to miss from 5 yards thanks to an amazing save from David Raya. So if you own Watkins, you have got every right to be annoyed with him this week. And Manchester City defenders also deserve a shout out too after they conceded early on against Ipswich. Ipswich created just 0.36 XG against the champions. They had just 1 shot all game, and yet they scored it. Last season, owning Manchester City defensive assets was not fun. It was a frustrating hobby, and it looks like it might be the same again this season. Are they worth having? I'm not so sure. So, we've got some winners, we've got some losers, but now it's time to make some noise for the absolutely amazing. It's time to celebrate the sublime. It is time for Hero of the Week.
Hero of the Week.
And this week's Hero of the Week is a robot, and that robot is Erling Haaland, sent from the future to score a comedy amount of goals on a very regular basis. He's now got 4 goals in his first 2 games of the season. He remains a potential cheat code in fantasy, and if you had first pick on draft night and snapped him up, and why wouldn't you, by the way, then you were laughing all the way to the footballing fantasy bank. He was not quite as prolific last season as he was in his first campaign in England. He ended the season with just 27 goals, poor thing, compared to 36. But he has started this season like a man possessed. Pep's been bigging him up as well, and he looks like he's ready to break more records than Usain Bolt at the Olympics. It's West Ham next for the T2000. He's got 4 goals in 4 games against them, so brace yourself for more Haaland heroics. All hail the next generation of striker. He wants your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle. He is Erling Haaland, and he is our hero of the week.
Hero of the Week.
Right, we are 2 game weeks into the new season, and if you've had a good start to your draft leagues, well done to you from us. If, on the other hand, you're languishing at the wrong end of the table, don't worry. There are still 36 more game weeks to sort your side out, so chill your football boots. However, rather than waiting another few weeks to be broadly happy with your squad, let's try and get you on the right path right now. In a moment, we're going to have a look at a few potential pickups you might be able to get over the line on this week's waivers or even in free agency. But first of all, let's take a look at the games that are going to shape your destiny in Game Week 3. And it all begins on Saturday the 31st of August with the lunchtime kickoff between Arsenal and Brighton. Last season, the Gunners did the double over Brighton, scoring 5 goals and conceding 0. Kai Havertz scored 2 of those goals and he got an assist. Saka, Trossard and Gabi Jesus were also on target. But Brighton did beat Arsenal 3-0 at the Emirates the season before last, and they won in London the year before that as well. So in the last 3 games at the Emirates, Brighton have won 2, compared to Arsenal's 1. Brentford take on Southampton at the G-Tech. These two have only ever played each other 4 times in the top flight, and Brentford have won 3 of them. Johan Wissa has 2 goals in 3 games against the Saints, and in the 2 games played at Brentford's ground, both matches have finished 3-0 to the Bees. Everton take on Bournemouth, and this one always seems to go the way of the home side. Everton have won 6 of their 7 top-flight games against Bournemouth at Goodison Park. Bournemouth, on the other hand, have won 5 of the 7 matches held at their ground. The bad news for Bournemouth is that this one is on Merseyside, so expect Everton to win. Ipswich take on Fulham at Portman Road. The last time these two played each other in the Premier League was way back in 2002. Ipswich won 1-0 thanks to a goal from Marcus Bent. It's Leicester against Aston Villa at the King Power Stadium. Leicester have failed to beat Villa at home in their last 4 attempts, but 5 games ago they did manage a win, and they absolutely battered Villa 4-0. Jamie Vardy bagging a brace and sinking 674 cans of Red Bull in celebration. It's Nottingham Forest against Wolves at the City Ground. These two sides have met 4 times in the Premier League. Wolves have won 1, and the last 3 meetings have all ended in draws. Cunha is the man, though, for this fixture. He has 3 goals in his last 2 games against Nottingham Forest, and it's West Ham at home to Manchester City. West Ham have not beaten City since 2015. City have scored 3 goals in each of their last 3 meetings against the Hammers, and as we've already mentioned, Erling Haaland loves a bit of West Ham. Then on Sunday, it's Chelsea against Crystal Palace. Palace have been rubbish this season so far, and history suggests it's only going to get worse this weekend because Chelsea have won the last 13 meetings between these two sides, and based on this week's evidence, they know how to score goals. It's Newcastle against Spurs at St James's Park. Newcastle have won the last couple against Spurs in the Northeast, 4-0 and 6-1. Alexander Isak has scored 4 of those 10 goals, and Anthony Gordon has been heavily involved in those victories as well. And the final game of the weekend takes place at Old Trafford. It's Manchester United against Liverpool. The last 2 meetings between these two have ended in draws, 0-0 and 2-2. The season before, though, United actually beat Liverpool at Old Trafford 2-1. They did, however, lose 7-0 at Anfield. So those are the fixtures for Game Week 3, but if you want to have a successful week in draft, you have got to raid those waivers. So let's have a look at who might be worth bringing in to your side.
The FPL Draft Zone Waiver Wants.
Now, before we get going with our tips for this week, it is, of course, transfer deadline day on Friday. The transfer window closes at 11 p.m. Your waiver deadline is 10 hours earlier at 1 p.m. on Friday. So there will be more players joining Premier League sides after those waivers go through, and they will not be available until the next round of waivers. I should say as well that any players who sign for a Premier League side within a 24-hour window before this week's waiver deadline will also be unavailable this week. They will be locked, and they will also not be available to bring into your side until the next waivers. And that is why the first players we're going to talk about today are actually players who have already joined their clubs last week and made their debuts for their new sides, and yet they are not in any of our draft teams because they signed too late to be considered for our Game Week 2 waivers. And those players are Ilkay Gundogan of Manchester City and João Felix of Chelsea. Gundogan came off the bench in City's win over Ipswich as he returned to the champions, having spent a year with Barcelona. In his time in Spain, he got 5 goals and picked up 9 assists in 36 La Liga games. In his final season with City, he also managed 14 returns. The season before that, he got 13 returns, and the season before that, he got 17 returns. So if there's one thing the German guarantees, it's, yes, you guessed it, returns. But he is now part of a City side that was not expecting to sign him and was not prepared to sign him. They were expecting a season without Ilkay Gundogan, and that means he is going to have some serious competition for a place in their starting 11. City have been lining up with Rico Lewis and Kovacic as their deepest lying midfielders, with Rico Lewis joining from right back to make an extra man in that midfield. And then there are 4 players playing behind Erling Haaland: Savio, Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne and Doku. So Gundogan has got to try and force his way into the side ahead of one of those players, and that's before you consider that Phil Foden and Rodri are also set to return, and they will both be guaranteed starters. Plus, there's the likes of Jack Grealish battling for minutes too. So while Gundogan may have left City as one of the first names on the team sheet, it remains to be seen if that will be the case in his second spell with the club. I do think he's still worth wavering in despite his minutes risk, just because his record speaks for itself. If he plays, he will get you points. And I do think he will force his way into City's starting 11 sooner rather than later. But who he replaces is a very difficult question to answer. One player who may be at risk is Savio, who has been excellent so far this season, but with Gundogan and Foden pushing for a start, I can see Bernardo reverting to the right-hand side of the City midfield, and that would then mean Savio becoming an impact player off the bench, with Gundo, KDB and Phil Foden sharing those two central spots in the City midfield. João Felix is another player who returned to the Premier League from Barcelona last week. He ended last season with 7 goals and 3 assists in Spain, having got 4 goals in 16 games in his first spell with Chelsea. You probably remember how good he looked on his Chelsea debut before being sent off and serving a 3-game ban, and he never really recovered from that suspension and lived up to his potential. He has been a bit of a footballing nomad over the last few seasons, but he now has a permanent home at Stamford Bridge. He signed a long-term deal, and maybe that stability will help him discover his best form again. FPL has classified him as a midfielder as opposed to a forward, which is bad news for draft managers looking to fill out their front line, but it does offer an attacking outlet from midfield in a potentially out-of-position role, and he showed his quality with a goal in Chelsea's win over Wolves. So if he can get minutes on a regular basis at Stamford Bridge, he could be a clever route into their side. The problem, of course, with Chelsea is that they are a car crash of a football club and they have more players than they know what to do with. So the question is, will he actually play regularly for Chelsea? Enzo Maresca has been pretty upbeat about him, saying, for me, he can play as a number 9, dropping in and giving us an extra man when we need more passes. Potentially, he is a top player, no doubt. So if you want to get ahead of the curve, roll the dice and assume he will be a regular starter at the Bridge, maybe this is the week to bring him in. Mikel Merino is another new addition to the Premier League, having signed from Arsenal. I think the assumption here is that Merino will play in the left 8 role that Arsenal have struggled to fill, with Havertz and Rice both playing there on and off over the last year or so. Merino is not prolific by any means. He got 5 goals last season and 3 assists playing for Real Sociedad. He did score for Spain in the Euros, but he also picked up 10 yellow cards over the course of his season in Spain. So he's definitely not going to be getting you any bonus points for your side. What I would say, though, is that after Mikel Arteta moved Declan Rice into that left 8 position, Rice had his best ever season in terms of goals and assists. He got 7 goals and 9 assists last season, and before that his best tally was 4 goals and 3 assists. So if you assume that Arteta will give Merino that same opportunity to go forward and join in the Arsenal attack, I would expect a similar output from the Spaniard to what we saw from Rice last season. He's 6'1" as well, so he will be another threat from set pieces. And Arsenal scored 22 goals from set pieces last season, not including penalties. So even though he doesn't have a history of getting a lot of returns, I do think the fact he's playing for an Arsenal side who will dominate the ball, play most of their football in the final third, and utilise his strengths further forward means he could be a low-key, under-the-radar pickup this week. A few other signings this week who will be available on the waivers. Matt O'Reilly of Brighton, who's just signed from Celtic. He's got a great goals and assists record in Scotland, but he did limp off injured on his Brighton debut on Tuesday night. And then at the time of recording, there are boatloads of potential signings coming in. Chiesa is a target for Liverpool. Victor Osimhen is a target for Chelsea. Ugarte looks like he's signing for Manchester United. Sam Johnston looks like he's signing for Wolves. And there will inevitably be loads more rumours and loads more deals done over the next few days. But outside of the newbies, there are also a few established Premier League players who have shown in these opening 2 game weeks that they could be decent pickups on the waivers. First up is Alex Iwobi, who was excellent in pre-season for Fulham. He scored a couple of goals, played very advanced, and that form and position has continued in Fulham's opening games. He's swapping roles with Emil Smith-Rowe a lot of interchanging going on between the 2 Arsenal Academy players, and looking a real threat in the final third. Everyone is talking about ESR, and rightly so, but I do think Iwobi is looking just as threatening, and he's playing more minutes. ESR is playing just over an hour a game at the moment as he works his way back to full fitness, but Iwobi has played the full 90 minutes twice now. The former Arsenal man could easily have scored against United in that opening game of the season when he and Pereira had that 2-on-1 situation that they didn't quite take advantage of. He did score this weekend against Leicester, and Fulham's next 4 games look pretty decent. Ipswich away, West Ham at home, Newcastle at home, and then Nottingham Forest away. So Iwobi, who is much more likely to be available on the waivers than Smith Rowe, is a player who could be a bit of an under-the-radar gem for the next few weeks, at least. Morgan Rogers is another player who impressed in Game Week 2. He didn't get any returns against Arsenal, but he was Villa's best player by a mile. He also topped their rankings in terms of the bonus points system. Villa played really well against the Gunners and lost, but if they put in that sort of performance in their next 4 games, then I think they're going to win every single one. They have Leicester City away next, and then they have Everton at home, Wolves at home, and Ipswich away. So I would say that if they even play to 75% of the level they reached against Arsenal, they will be walking away from those 4 games with 12 points. Rodgers has not looked like scoring just yet, but based on last season's figures, it's only a matter of time before he does return. He got 3 goals and an assist in just 636 minutes of football last year, so that's basically the equivalent of 4 returns in 7 matches, and surely he will return in those next 4 games. Jacob Ramsey and Maatsen both came on and looked good on that left-hand side against Arsenal as well, so if either of them are available, now might be the time to try to get them in, particularly Maatsen, who looked very good going forward against the Gunners. And if you want a short-term Villa signing with a view to the next game or two, Kosta Nedeljkovic looks like he's got a very good chance of playing at right-back because Matty Cash limped off injured against Arsenal, and Nedeljkovic replaced him and played for 74 minutes. So if Emery trusts him to do that against last season's Premier League runners-up, you would fancy him to play him against mighty Leicester City. And 2 Ipswich players to think about. First up, Sammy Schmodics should be in all our thoughts ahead of the waiver deadline. He got 27 goals in the Championship last season. He's been classified as a midfielder in FPL, despite playing as a deep-lying forward for Blackburn. He got off the mark on his debut at the Etihad, and Ipswich certainly didn't disgrace themselves in their games against City or Liverpool, and their run gets a tiny bit easier now. Couldn't get much harder, to be fair, but 7 of their next 8 games are green on the FPL fixture difficulty ticker. It's Fulham at home next, and they also play Southampton, Everton, Brentford and Leicester in that spell. Whether he can transfer that goal-scoring form to the top flight remains to be seen, but he's surely going to be Ipswich's talisman for the season, especially now it looks like Armando Broja's move to the club seems to have fallen through. And also, you have to say that Smodic's career history is actually pretty impressive. In 359 games, he scored 111 goals, which works out at a goal every 3 games. But if you factor in his assists as well, of which he's got 40, it basically means he has a return of either a goal or an assist every 2.3 matches. So there is a very high upside to Smodic if you can beat rival managers to his signature. And then there is Jack Clarke, who was also signed for Ipswich from Sunderland this week. He's another midfield option to consider. He got 15 goals and 4 assists in the Championship last season. He got 9 goals and 12 assists the season before that. He plays on the wing, and even though he's joining a side that is going to face an uphill struggle to stay up this season, Kieran McKenna is clearly doing everything he can to give them a fighting chance. They bought good players, he's a good manager, and they are buying goals with these signings, and goals are what's going to keep them up. A couple of other players to consider this week are the Chelsea outcasts, Raheem Sterling and Ben Chilwell, both of whom are expected to find new clubs before the transfer deadline. Sterling's been linked with Aston Villa. It was only a couple of seasons ago. He was absolutely smashing it for Manchester City, but the move to Chelsea has not gone well. However, if he can go to a club that isn't quite as mad as the Blues and play for a manager who is there for more than 5 minutes, say, perhaps he could rediscover his form and become a solid midfield pick for you. Meanwhile, Ben Chilwell has been linked with Manchester United, but he's a player who seems to excel as a wing-back and not a left-back, and the problem for him is that not many teams play that system these days, so I'm not really sure what the future is going to hold for him. If he does get a move and he is used as an attack-minded wing-back, he's one to monitor. Otherwise, to be honest, I think I'd steer clear. So those are some of the players we think you should be considering for your waivers this week, and there's still time for 1 or 2 more signings to join the Premier League and become additional options as well. But that is almost it for today from a hotel room in Monaco. Game Week 3 starts on Saturday, the 31st of August at 12:30 BST, with a game between Arsenal and Brighton. The deadline for your waivers is Friday, the 30th of August at 11 AM BST, and the deadline for the transfer market is Friday, the 30th at 11 PM. So there are deadlines all over the shop. We will be back next week, but in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the pod if you haven't already, and if you could leave a 5-star review or maybe a nice little comment, that would be great as well. You can also follow us on social media. We're on X and on Instagram. Our handle on both is at FPL Draft Zone. But that is it for this week. Hopefully your draft league is starting to take shape after 2 game weeks and you're sitting proudly on the top of it. But if you're not, do not worry. The league is young, there are plenty of points to play for, and if you use the waivers intelligently and make the most of free agency, anything is possible, my friends. Until next time, thanks for listening, and bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.